Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm using mica powder with stencils. The mica powders that I'm using today were kindly sent to me to use from Arteza. They have two sets of mica powder, the set of 60 colours with 5-gram bottles, which is the ones that I'm using today, but they also have a set of 35 colours with 10-gram bottles as well. The colour selection obviously is just slightly smaller. These ethically sourced mica powders contain no binders, so they're suitable for the craft industry, for like card making, acrylic pouring, resin and epoxy work, but also for the cosmetic industry, so great for things like soap making, makeup and nail art and things like that. The 60 colour selection is really very good. There's quite a lot of colours that are useful for both light coloured cardstock and also dark coloured cardstock. There's lots of whites and golds and silvers, and then lots of pinks, purples, greens, blues and some chameleon colours as well, which are really nice, and they have kind of like a combination of different pigments in them, which are really pretty. And then they've also got the glow pigments, which are the ones that I'm going to be using today. So the box themselves, once you open it, you get this little tiny spoon that you can use to take out the powder from the bottles if you want to. So that's just there on the top, and then you get all of these beautiful colours. I have to say, this is just so pretty to look at. I did rearrange the bottles. They don't come in the colour order that they are on the back of the box, and I'm one of those annoying people that like to have things in those kind of colour orders, so I did rearrange them for the purposes of the video and just for me in real life as well. So this is what the bottles look like. They're just, like I said, really very pretty, and you can see the colour of them really nicely through the bottles because they're clear. Like I said, there are some kind of different ones which I will share with you in a minute. These mica powders are supplied via weight rather than volume, so it's a bit difficult to see here because the mica powder is on the edge of the bottle, but as you can see here, the one on the right hand side, this is a green colour, that has very little actually in the bottle compared to the one on the left hand side, which is like a really pinky colour, and that's purely because they are packaged via weight rather than volume. And so the pigment on the right hand side weighs a lot more than the pigment on the left hand side, so you don't get as much in the bottle. This isn't an error on Arteza's part, it purely is because they weigh completely different. But these pigments go a long way. You really only need a small amount of each pigment, and these are the glow colours that I'm going to use today, and looking at them they look white, but once you add them to black cardstock or dark colour cardstock, they come alive and they're just really very beautiful. So I just wanted to show you those because they do look white in the bottle. Like I said, these are just really pretty. Because they don't have any binders in them compared to some other craft mica powders, you do need to sort of apply them in slightly different ways. So I did mix the first one here with some water. That actually worked really quite well, but you do get a little bit of pigment transfer on your finger once you kind of rub over it, and some of the colours are a little bit kind of worse than this and come off really completely. But what I did was I added some gum arabic into the water, and this gum arabic is a solution that you can add, or a substance I should say, to watercolours, and it makes them more translucent, and I thought that it would work really nicely for these mica powders, and it really does. You can just add a very small amount into some water and that just makes it stick or bind to the cardstock. So this first one here, I just added a little bit into the water. For the one underneath, I added the gum arabic directly to the mica powder, mixed that kind of into a paste, and then added some water afterwards, and they both worked really nicely. Next, I tried it with a Quickie glue pen. This worked so well, I was really quite surprised. So if you happen to like calligraphy and things like that, I think that would work really nicely with these mica powders. Next, I tried Versamark, and I have to say I was a little bit disappointed with this. I do think that I probably didn't let the Versamark dry enough, but even after it's dried after a couple of days, it does still come off on your finger a little bit, not massively, but a little bit. But what I really loved was the Essential Glue Pad, and this worked perfectly. It dried really very quickly and no excess powder comes off afterwards. And then I tried some double-sided tape as well, and again that worked really nicely. I think this would work really well if you wanted to add like a plaid background or something to a card. I think that would be really, really nice. With any of these, you could add a sealer on top and that would keep the mica powder in place. But I did just want to try to, you know, avoid that if I could. Next, I added some of the mica powder into a spray bottle with water and gum arabic, and again that worked really nicely. So you could create your own mica sprays if you wanted to with this set of mica powder. And then I also mixed the mica powder with some gum arabic and water again, and just used that to create splatters. That worked really, really nicely, and I think that they kind of like pearlescent splatters would work really nicely on a lot of cards. But because I liked that essential glue pad the most, I'm going to use that on my card today. So I have an A2 size white card base, so a finished size of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I've just folded that over so it's one sort of flat layer. And I'm just adhering that down onto my craft mat here with some Memo tape. And then I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Bouquet of Roses stencil. I do apologise because I used this in one of my recent videos, but I absolutely love this stencil and hopefully it just shows some versatility to the stencil. So just adhered that down with some Memo tape, and then here I've got that essential glue pad and I've just added some glue onto the actual pad. It comes separately if you to add it on yourself, so you can refill it, which is really nice. And then I'm using a detailer sponge brush here, or a blending tool, and in my experiments this worked really nicely, but as I was adding it to this stencil, the top of the foam kind of bent a little bit, and so I had to change halfway through what I was actually using. This kind of ended up kind of seeping under the stencil a little bit, and I didn't realise while I was doing it, so that's a bit unfortunate. But once I cut one of the blending foams down in half and I used this instead, this worked really nicely. I was still a little bit heavy-handed, I have to admit, so in future I probably wouldn't add such a thick layer of this glue, but it did work nicely. So I'm just adding that on, and if you kind of look from the side, although you can't see on camera, if you look from the side in real life, you can kind of see a sheen of the glue, so you can see where you've been. So I'm just removing that Memo tape here and that stencil, and then I'm going to lift this up and you can see here where the glue is. You can see that you get a sheen there, and you can see also some of the little bits around the edges just bubbled up a little bit, which wasn't great. I did rectify it a little bit later on in the video. But here I'm taking 3 of the glow colours from the mica powder set, and I'm just using that spoon just to add a little bit here onto my glass mat. And I use a lot of mica powder. You really don't need to use as much as I did in real life. I would put a little bit into the lid of the bottle, and then if you had too much you could just put it back into the bottle. For the purposes of the video, I thought it would be easier to add it onto the mat, and it was, but I did waste a little bit of the mica powder. Like I said, you really need a very small amount of this mica powder. A little goes a very long way. But what you could do if you did like me was to spray it with some water and then kind of smush some cardstock in, like ink smushing. That would work really nicely and use up that mica powder. So now I'm going to apply the mica powder onto my card using a fluffy brush, and again I added way too much here, but because the glue is quite wet at this point, I didn't want to smear it, so it did work quite nicely, but you probably don't need to add quite as much mica powder as I'm doing here. But as you can see, as you add it on, the image comes to life. It's just very, very pretty. And this is the Sage Glow colour, and like I said, when you first take it out the bottle it's white, and then when you add it onto the dark colour cardstock it turns into this really beautiful green shade. So I'm just going to go along and add that where all of the leaves are in this stencil pattern. I wasn't too concerned if I got some of the colours mixed up with the flowers. I think it works absolutely fine for this particular image, or this image stencil I should say, but if you wanted to you could definitely do it in sections and add the glue and then add the mica powder, and then be careful to add the stencil back on top, because the mica powders, once they're in place and they're dry, they don't really move, especially with this particular application with the essential glue pad. So you could do it that way if you wanted to, but I quite liked how they kind of mixed together a little bit. So I added that second colour, and that was the Bubblegum Glow, which is a really pretty pinky purpley shade. And then here I'm adding in the Periwinkle Glow, and this is a really pretty kind of blue toned purple. I just absolutely love it, and I thought that they would work really nicely kind of mixed together for these roses. And this was really therapeutic, just adding all this powder on top, and the image kind of comes to life. Now this looks really messy and it won't stay like this, but I'm going to set this aside as it is to dry for about 15 minutes. In reality, I should have left it a little bit longer because of those excess kind of bits of glue on the outside, but I'll share how I kind of fix that later on. Next, I want a sentiment for my card, so I'm using this Says It All set from Clearly Besotted, and I'm taking this Happy Birthday sentiment. I'm going to stamp it onto some of the same black cardstock that I used for the card base, which is Hero Arts Pitch Black. I've just inked that up with some Versamark ink. I did prep the cardstock first with an anti-static powder tool because I'm going to add some embossing powder on the top. This is Wow Bright White embossing powder, so I'm just adding that onto the image or the sentiment here, tapping off the excess, and then I can heat set that until it's completely melted. And then I'm going to cut it down using one of the Simon Says Stamp sentiment label dies. So just running that through the Gemini Mini here. And then I can pop that out the other end. And then I'm just going to cut the sides down so that it's a smaller strip using my mini guillotine. So just cutting those edges down there. And then I'm taking my panel here that has been drying for about 15 minutes, and I'm using a Swiffer cloth to remove the excess powder from the cardstock here. These bits of, I cut my Swiffer cloths down, and you can reuse these multiple times. Although it looks like there's loads of mica powder on the cardstock here, there actually very little comes off onto the Swiffer cloth, so you can reuse them multiple times. So I made sure first of all that the actual card base was pretty clean, and then I went over the image itself, and like I said, you can see where some of the glue kind of seeped under the stencil, which is really unfortunate, and while I was doing it I didn't really realise, but I didn't want to waste it at this point, so I let it dry again for another 15 minutes and then went back over it with the Swiffer cloth, and that seemed to kind of do the trick. And for those little bits of excess mica powder and glue, I'm just going to scrape them off with a craft knife and just try and do my best to kind of rectify the image. When I do this again, I'm going to be careful with how much glue I add, and then also use the right tool in the first place to apply the glue. But like I said, I didn't want to waste the card. To finish off, I'm going to add the sentiment down in the bottom right hand corner with some foam tape, and then I'm going to finish off with some Lucy's Moonstone Sequins. So just using some small dabs of multi-medium matte glue there just to keep those sequins in place, and then it kind of hides any of that kind of excess glue as well on the sides of the where the stencil was. So like I said, it isn't perfect, but actually I think it turned out really nicely in the end, and those mica powders are just so pretty to use, and they just really shine in the light. Very beautiful. So if you've stayed until the end of the video, I want to thank you with a giveaway from Arteza. The giveaway is kindly sponsored by Arteza and is open to residents in the United States, UK and EU countries. To enter, you need to be subscribed to the Arteza YouTube channel. A subscription to my channel is encouraged but not required. You need to like and comment on this video and tell me which country you're in, and you need to like and comment on the Arteza video that I'm going to link below in the description bar here on YouTube. The giveaway closes on the 10th of October 2020, and the winner will be picked at random from the comments. The winner will be contacted via the comment section, and the winner needs to agree for me to be able to send their details onto Arteza, who are going to ship the prize. Thank you so much for watching today. Links to the products that I used will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.